The day I signed the papers on my cabin, I sat in the parking lot of the title company and cried. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that comes out when something you've been working toward for 3 years finally becomes real and your body doesn't know what else to do with it. I was 37. I'd spent most of my adult life in apartments with thin walls and neighbors who cooked fish at 11 o'clock at night. I worked remotely as a medical billing consultant, which meant I could live anywhere, and I'd chosen a small mountain town in western Colorado because I'd driven through it once on a road trip and pulled over twice just to look at the view. The cabin needed work when I bought it. The deck boards were soft in 2 spots. The kitchen faucet dripped, and the previous owners had left a deer mount on the wall that I couldn't bring myself to touch for 6 weeks. But it was mine. 1 bedroom, a sleeping loft, 840 square feet, and 11 acres of pine trees that didn't belong to anyone but me. I told my family at Thanksgiving. My mother smiled the way she smiles when she doesn't quite know what to say. My father asked how much I'd paid, and when I told him, he whistled low and said that was a lot for something so far from everything. My younger brother congratulated me in a way that felt genuine, and my older sister looked across the table and said, "Oh, that's perfect. We could use that in the summer." I didn't respond to that. I let it pass the way you let a car alarm go. Assume it'll stop. Go back to your mashed potatoes. It didn't stop. The first time she called about the cabin was in February. She wanted to know if the roads were paved all the way up. I said most of the way. She said good, because she and her husband were thinking of coming up in June with the kids, maybe staying a couple of weeks. I said I'd have to check my schedule. She said she figured I could just work from my laptop anywhere anyway, so it wouldn't be a problem. I said I'd look at the calendar and get back to her. I did not get back to her. She called again in March. Same conversation, slightly more specific. Now it was June 14th. Now it was June 14th. Now it was 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3. Now her husband's brother and his family wanted to come too. So it would be her husband, their 3 kids, his brother's family of 5, and possibly her friend from college, and that friend's boyfriend. 13 people in my 1-bedroom cabin with a sleeping loft. I said, that's a lot of people for the space. She said, it'll be fine. Kids can sleep anywhere. We'll bring air mattresses. I said, I'm not sure I'm going to be available in June. She said, you work from home. You're always available. That sentence sat in my chest for a while after I hung up. I want to be clear about something before I go further, because I know what some people will think when they hear a story like this. They'll think, why didn't you just say no? And the answer is that I did say no. And the answer is that I did say no. Not in those words, maybe, not with that particular directness. But I've been saying versions of no my entire life to my sister, and it had never once mattered. She didn't hear no. She heard a negotiating position. She heard the opening bid in a conversation. She fully expected to win because she always had. When we were kids, she borrowed my things without asking and returned them broken or not at all. When we were teenagers, she told our parents things I told her in confidence. Not to hurt me, she always said, but because she was worried about me. When we were adults, she borrowed $2,000 from me for a car repair and never mentioned it again. I stopped bringing it up after the 3rd time because the conversation always ended with her crying and me feeling like the villain for wanting my money back. So when she started talking about my cabin like it was a family resource, I recognized the pattern. I just didn't know what I was going to do about it. What I did, quietly and without telling anyone, was call the county assessor's office. I'd had an uneasy feeling since February that I couldn't quite name. Something about the way she said we could use that at Thanksgiving. The certainty of it. The absence of any question in her voice. It nagged at me. The woman at the assessor's office was helpful. She walked me through how to pull my own property record, and I did online that same afternoon. Everything looked correct. My name on the deed. My name as sole owner. But she mentioned before she hung up that I might want to consider setting up alerts through the county's document recording system if such a thing was available in my jurisdiction, because it would notify me anytime a document was recorded against my property. I looked into it. My county didn't have automated alerts, but I found a title monitoring service that did for a reasonable annual fee. I signed up that same week. 2 weeks later, I got an email notification. A document had been recorded against my property, a quick claim deed, adding my sister as a co-owner. Isera. My kitchen table for a long time with that email open on my laptop. My coffee went cold. Outside, a pair of jays were fighting over something in the yard, and I watched them without seeing them. Then I called my attorney. I'd used her once before for the closing on the cabin, and I liked her. She was direct, and she didn't talk in circles. I forwarded her the notification. She pulled the document, and she called me back within the hour. This is a forged deed, she said. The notarization is valid. Whoever did this found a notary willing to stamp it or forged the notary stamp. 2, which is a separate felony. Your signature is not your signature. This is real estate fraud. I asked her what I needed to do. First, she said, we file a quiet title action to invalidate the deed. Second, you report this to law enforcement. Third, you contact your title insurance company. You have title insurance? I did. I paid for the enhanced policy. Good, she said. Use it. She filed the quiet title action the next morning. I called the county sheriff's office and reported the fraud. The deputy I spoke with took down the information. Read the document. I emailed him and said a detective would be in touch. He didn't sound surprised, which I found both reassuring and disturbing. And then I waited. My sister called on a Thursday, 3 weeks before her planned arrival date. She wanted to talk logistics. Did I have a good grill up there? Should they bring their own charcoal? Was there cell service for the kids? I let her talk. I answered her questions normally. Yes, there's a grill. Cell service is fine on the south side of the property. She said, great. She'd start packing lists. I didn't say anything about the deed. I want to explain why, and I want to be honest about it. It wasn't entirely strategic. Part of me wasn't ready for the conversation. Part of me was still sitting with the fact that my sister, my actual sister, who I'd shared a room with until I was 12, who I'd called when our dog died, had either forged my signature or paid someone to do it in order to put her name on my property. I needed a little more time with that before I could speak to her calmly. But it was also, yes, partly strategic. My attorney had advised me not to confront her yet. The sheriff's detective, a quiet woman named Reeves, who called me the following Tuesday, said the same thing. Don't tip her off. Let us work. Detective Reeves was thorough. She traced the notary stamp on the forged deed to a mobile notary in my sister's city who had a prior complaint against her license. She interviewed that notary. The notary initially denied everything, and then Reeves told me later changed her story considerably when presented with phone records showing 7 calls between her and my sister in the 2 weeks before the document was filed. That was not my sister acting alone on an impulse. That was my sister planning. I kept thinking about that. The planning of it, the calls, the research, the decision at some point to find a notary willing to do something illegal and pay her or convince her or whatever conversation that was. I kept thinking about the Tuesday afternoon when my sister had done all of that and whether she'd made dinner afterward and helped her kids with homework and watched something on TV and whether any of it had felt wrong to her or whether she'd filed it away as just a practical problem she'd solved. The Friday before my sister was planning to arrive, Detective Reeves called me. "We're ready to move on this," she said. "I want you to be prepared that this may happen while your family is present." Is that going to be a problem for you? I thought about it. No, I said. My sister arrived on a Saturday morning. She'd sent me a text at 7 a.m. saying they were on the road, that they turned out to be her husband, their 3 kids ranging from 5 to 11, her husband's brother and his wife and their 2 kids, and her college friend and that friend's new fiance, 11 people plus 2 dogs, which she had not mentioned even up the night before. I was sitting on the front porch with my coffee when the caravan came up the dirt road. 2 SUVs and a minivan with a cargo carrier on top. They parked in the clearing. The kids piled out first already. Running, my sister climbed down from the passenger seat of the lead SUV, stretched her arms over her head, looked at the trees and the mountain behind them, and smiled. "Perfect," she said. She sounded like she was arriving somewhere that belonged to her. Her husband was already opening the her brother-in-law was lifting a cooler out of the back of the second SUV. Nobody had said hello to me yet. I stayed on the porch. My sister noticed me and waved. "We made great time," she said. "Barely hit any traffic. Is the kitchen stocked?" We didn't stop for groceries because we figured you'd know what we needed up here. I said, "I didn't stock it for this." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I have food for myself. I didn't buy groceries for 11 people." Her husband looked up from the cargo carrier. The kids had stopped running and were watching. "Well," my sister said, and she laughed a little the way you laugh when a child says something unexpected. "We can drive into town. It's fine. Can you show me the layout inside? I want to figure out sleeping arrangements." "I don't think that's going to work," I said. "What's not going to work?" I came down off the porch. I walked to where she was standing and I stopped close enough that we were having a real conversation and not a conversation across a clearing. "You're not staying here," I said. "None of you are." My sister stared at me. "What are you talking about?" "We've been planning this for months." "You've been planning this," I said. "I told you I'd have to check my schedule. I never confirmed. I never invited anyone. You planned a trip to my house without my permission, and I'm telling you now that you can't stay." Her husband set down what he was holding. "Come on," he said. "The kids have been in the car for 4 hours." "I understand that," I said, "and I'm sorry the drive was wasted, but this is my property, and I didn't agree to this." "It's family property," my sister said. There it was. "No," I said, "it's not. You're being ridiculous." She crossed her arms. "We're family. You have 11 acres. You have a loft. You're going to stand here and tell me there's no room." "There's room," I said. "The question is whether you have the right to be in it. You don't. You were never invited." Her college friend had gone quiet. The brother-in-law and his wife were exchanging a look I couldn't fully read. The 5-year-old had wandered over to a pine tree and was poking at the bark. My sister shifted. Something moved in her expression. A calculation, I think, though I didn't know then exactly what it was. "I have as much right to be here as you do," she said. "What does that mean?" I asked, but I already knew. "It means this isn't just your cabin," she said. "I have rights here, too." I looked at her for a long moment. "I'd like you to leave," I said. "All of you. Please load back up and go." She didn't move. "I'm not leaving. Call the police if you want. I'll tell them I'm a co-owner of this property." So I called the police. I'd already spoken with the county sheriff's department, so when I called the non-emergency line and gave my name and address, the dispatcher said she'd send someone right out. She said it in a way that suggested someone had already Flag my address. Deputy Crane arrived in about 20 minutes. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a calm manner that I appreciated. He introduced himself, asked me to explain the situation, and I did. Briefly. Private property, family. Members present without invitation. I was asking them to leave. He turned to my sister. Ma'am, do you have documentation showing any ownership, interest in this property? My sister pulled out her phone. She'd saved a photo of the quitclaim. Date. Deputy Crane looked at it. He asked for her ID. He stepped away for a few minutes and made a call. When he came back, he said, Ma'am, I need you to be aware that there's an active court action pending regarding this deed and a criminal investigation. The deed you're referencing has been identified as potentially fraudulent. My sister would pale. Not gradually, all at once. That's not, she started. That deed is legitimate. I have a right, ma'am, he said quietly. I'd strongly advise you not to say anything further without speaking to an attorney. Her husband took a step forward. What does that mean? What criminal investigation? Deputy Crane explained in general terms that recording a forged deed was a felony under Colorado law, that using a fraudulent deed to claim property rights was a separate offense, that the investigation was active and ongoing. The clearing was very quiet. Even the dogs had stopped moving around. My sister looked at me. The expression on her face was something I don't have a clean word for. It was anger and it was fear. And underneath both of those, it was something else. Something that looked a lot like she'd believed somewhere that this would work, that I wouldn't fight it, that she would show up with her family and her forged document, and I would not call anyone and would not push back and would eventually just absorb it the way I'd always absorbed everything she'd taken from me. I want you to leave, I said again. Please take your family and go. They left. It took 20 minutes to reload everything. The kids were confused, and one of them was crying, and I stood on the porch and watched. And I did not go inside, and I did not cry, though I wanted to. The brother-in-law paused as he passed me to get to his car. He looked at me for a second, and then he said, I didn't know about the deed. For what it's worth. I believed him. I nodded. He kept walking. The criminal case moved forward. The notary cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge on her own conduct. My sister was charged with felony fraud in connection with a real estate instrument and a related charge of criminal impersonation for forging my signature. Her husband was not charged, as far as investigators could determine. He genuinely had not known. The quiet title action was resolved in my favor. My attorney filed a motion to expunge the fraudulent deed, and it was granted. My name was restored as sole owner of record. The title insurance company reimbursed my legal costs in full. My sister pled guilty to a reduced charge. She received a deferred sentence with probation, community service, and restitution. The restitution included, among other things, the $2,000 she'd borrowed from me 8 years earlier. I hadn't mentioned that. Her attorney must have found it in the discovery. My mother called me 3 weeks after the arrest. She was crying. She said she didn't understand how things had gotten this far. She asked me if I was going to press charges, which I explained was not how criminal proceedings worked. I hadn't had any choice once I filed the initial report. She said she hoped we could all move past this eventually. I told her I hope so too, and I meant it mostly. I don't speak to my sister currently. I don't know if that's permanent. I've thought about it a lot, the way you think about a decision that doesn't have a clean answer. What she did wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a mistake in the normal sense. She thought it through, made calls, paid. Someone executed a plan that takes a particular kind of certainty that your needs are more important than another person's rights. I don't know where that comes from in her. I know it didn't start with the cabin. The cabin was just the first time there were legal consequences. What I know for certain is this. I'm sitting on my porch right now, writing this, and the J's are back in. The yard and the deck boards I had, replaced last spring, are solid under my feet. The deer mount is finally down. I donated it to a local hunting club who seemed pleased. The kitchen faucet doesn't drip anymore. The title to this property has one name on it, and it's mine. I bought this place on purpose. I eye it on purpose. And I am here alone in the best possible way on 11 acres of pine trees that belong to no one but me. That's what I fought for. That's what it was always about. I keep coming back to the moment she stepped out of that SUV and looked at my trees like they already belonged to her. That image doesn't leave me. Not because it still hurts. It does. Less now. But because it tells me something true about how consequences actually work. My sister didn't arrive at that clearing by accident. She got there through a series of choices, each one smaller than it looked. The first choice was probably just deciding that my no was a suggestion. The next was deciding that my property was really a family resource she hadn't accessed yet. And somewhere down that road came the phone calls, the notary, the forged signature, the filed deed. None of it happened in a single dramatic moment. It accumulated the way most things do, quietly and over time. What I've had to sit with is that I made choices too. I let early versions of this pattern go unaddressed for years. Not because I was weak. I don't think that's the right word for it, but because I didn't yet understand that. Doing nothing is also a decision. Every time I absorbed what she took and said nothing, I was teaching her something. That lesson cost both of us. Eventually, the thing that saved me practically was paying attention. Signing up for that title monitoring service was not a dramatic act. It cost less than a dinner out, but it came from a place of clear-eyed thinking about who I was dealing with and what was actually at stake. I've thought about that a lot. How the most important move I made in this whole situation was a quiet Tuesday afternoon decision to take my own property seriously, not to assume good faith would protect me, not to wait until something went wrong to start caring, to think ahead and act on what I knew rather than on what I hoped. That kind of clear thinking is hard to hold on to when the person you're dealing with is family. There's a particular pressure that comes with that. The expectation that love means absorbing harm, that loyalty means looking away, that keeping the peace is more important than keeping what's yours. I believed versions of that for a long time. I don't anymore. What I know now is that standing your ground doesn't require anger. It doesn't require a confrontation and a clearing with children watching and cars loaded with luggage. Ideally, it happens much earlier, much quieter, in the small moments when someone tests whether your boundaries are real. The strength to hold those boundaries isn't stubbornness. It's self-respect that's been thought through. It's understanding that you are allowed to have things that are yours and that protecting them is not cruelty. My sister made her choices. The law responded to them with its own logic. The notary talked, the records existed, the evidence was there. I didn't engineer any of that. I just didn't disappear when it mattered. The cabin is still mine, the deed says. So clearly, the way it always should have. I replaced the deck boards. I took down the deer mount. I learned later than I should have that the quietest and most durable form of justice is simply refusing to let what's yours be taken. Not with drama, not with rage, but with the calm, clear-headed certainty that you have every right to be exactly where you are.